Greetings and welcome everyone. Anthony Marsh on Power Rangers Lost Galaxy fan film with a new episode of the Terra podcast and the first of PR Lost Galaxy's 2014 video commentary season 8. Man, 8 seasons of this podcast over the course of my 10 years on YouTube later. Presented by my Morphin Megaverse Power Rangers Facebook group. So yeah, and also since this year is my channel's 10th anniversary, and I thought, let's do a new episode of my podcast. And also, this is going to be the only episode of the podcast for April, because I know I haven't uploaded a lot all month because I've been busy with, at the time of this recording, I'm busy doing pre-production work on my new Power Rangers Lost Galaxy fan film project. I'll do details about Infinite Frontier and Power Rangers Lost Galaxy 2022 on a different video. But for now, let's focus on what I'm really excited to talk about and pick up the speed. Last I discussed on the podcast, which was part of last season because I had to stop for a while because I needed a break. And I apologize for not making any new podcast episodes or any kind of videos for the month of April because what happened was, while I was off the podcast and other videos and updates about my content about Power Rangers and, you know, what I'm supposed to be about on this channel, I was sick, but I recovered, and again, the pre-production stuff on my new Power Rangers Lost Galaxy fan film project. That's why I've been off for a while. But for now, I'm going to give you guys a new video talking about the Disney era of Power Rangers, as promised last month, because I was so wrapped up about doing some videos relating to Turbo because this year's their anniversary, and might do a video talking about Operation Overdrive and then do a Bookenger versus Overdrive type video if you guys are interested in that later on this year. And I'm still working on getting on my WoW Force retrospective video going in the meantime. It's been, oh my god, I'm this old now since 2002. I was 9 going on 10 years old in 2002, and it was 20 years ago when WoW Force aired. And I never really thought, by the airing of Power Rangers WoW Force, that Power Rangers would have its first ownership change from Saban to Disney. And even when I was watching Wild Force this was still when the show was still airing on Fox Kids in its final months of broadcast on Saturday mornings. They were no longer doing weekday afternoon showings for shows like Digimon and Power Rangers at that point, and we were transitioning from Fox Kids to like ABC Family and then later ABC Kids, with, you know, Power Rangers being with the under the house mouse, that being Disney. And I knew from the moment they started putting on Power Ranger content, and this was following again Saban's buyout, Power Rangers' buyout from Saban to Disney, that when Fox Family by the beginning of 2002 would be renamed as ABC Family, I started to notice they would start airing reruns of Power Rangers on what was ABC Family, currently known now as the Freeform Network. But ABC Family was a long time ago since it launched. It was first Fox Family, but by the beginning of 2002, they would be renamed as ABC Family, and the channel was named ABC Family for a long time until like 2014 or so, because it was a really long time. I know I don't watch ABC Family, even back when we did have Power Rangers and Digimon and all that other stuff that was on there at the time. But when they stopped airing Power Rangers and all that other stuff that was on ABC Family, even part of the JetX block on ABC Family, in 2006, during the near midway point and end of Mystic Force in 2006, ABC Family would drop airing Power Rangers and their other programs, but I'll discuss more of that when we get to the Mystic Force season in retrospect and how I felt about that season when watching it. And so the remaining Power Rangers would be on Toon Disney and their Jetix block until Toon Disney would be renamed as Jetix altogether for all of 2008 during the Jungle Fury season. And after Jungle Fury, Jetix was renamed Disney XD as of currently, but all that's so history. So here's what I think about the Disney era of Power Rangers 20 years later. I really underestimated the Disney era of Power Rangers. I really did. And of all the eras of the franchise over the course of now almost next year, 2023, will be Power Rangers' big 30th anniversary. Of all the eras of Power Rangers we've had since Saban's original era, since 1993, with Mighty Morphin Season 1 up until Wild Force, Time Force. I hardly ever talk about the Disney era on my podcast a lot. I mean, I did do a video about the Disney era back in 2018. It's probably still up on my channel, or I probably had it unlisted or so because of some content ID over visuals or something. But I never hardly talk about the Disney era. The only time I would talk about a Disney era season is unless it's RPM, because I know that back in my early days of doing the podcast a few years ago in 2015, I did do a lot of bad mouthing about RPM, and I know a lot of Power Ranger fans will give me some heat for this, for bad mouthing RPM, but yet I can bad mouth Operation Overdrive if I like, because, yeah, Operation Overdrive had problems, but again, we'll get to that. But other than that, I don't hardly talk about Ninja Storm or Dino Thunder. Well, I have talked about Dino Thunder here and there and some references or so, but I have never really talked about these seasons overall in general, and even unless if it's Wild Force, the season that actually and technically was the start of the Disney era, but the midway point of Wild Force was all Disney. The first chunk of Wild Force, when the first batch of episodes from Lionheart all the way to Master's Last Stand, and plus the Time Force team up, two-parter, was all on Fox Kids from February to late August, I believe, of 2002. That was when Power Rangers was still airing on Fox. And so after that Master's Last Stand episode, the Cole and Master Org episode, starting with Unfinished Business all the way to the end of the Power Rangers, that would be all Disney taking over Power Rangers. And so I never really understood why all these years later I was just so... I was always overlooking this era. I know it exists. I've seen Wild Force. I've seen Ninja Storm, Dino Thunder, SPD, Mystic Force, Operation Overdrive, Jungle Fury, and RPM. The only thing I didn't want to see from the Disney era, and even all these years later, even after 2010, is, of course, the 2010 reversion of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers' first season. The only thing from the Disney era I had to skim, because the reversion... well, obviously, it's just trash. They should have never re-aired the first season for 32 episodes with those awful comic book-like effects and stuff, and also that god-awful Mountain Dew fan art, amateur art-looking logo of the original MMPR logo for 2010. But hey, that was 11 years ago, right? 12 years ago? Sorry. It was a lifetime ago, man. But personally, though... Even when we had the Neo Saban era, I started to appreciate the Disney seasons, because my attitude during the Disney era was very cynical. I was, during Wild Force, I enjoyed Wild Force for its first chunk, even when it was still on Fox, and also rewatched those episodes when they were on ABC Family, when they were just slowly getting Power Rangers onto Disney networks and away from Fox. Because Saban was bought, Saban Entertainment was shut down, and Disney was starting to take over what Saban's franchises, being Power Rangers and Digimon, and for the stuff that was part of the Saban Entertainment Fox Kids library, like, the 90s X-Men and Spider-Man animated series, and, and whatever else they had at the time. Because, and then eventually, when we do get around Dino Thunder season in 2004, when we had the birth of the Jetix network. Now, Jetix I really liked how they handled airing Power Rangers between ABC Family and Toon Disney, respectively, which I liked because ABC Family's block with the kids stuff, including Power Rangers, will be during the day, while Toon Disney's Jet X block would always be primetime. And that was one of the few things I liked when I had direct TV. I had satellite back then. Satellite TV back then. I know some of you probably had cable back when this took place during Dino Thunder through Jungle Fury. That what was cool about it was, you know, you had Jetix on ABC Family for the daytime hours and then Jetix on Toon Disney during the primetime hours. But by the time we got to Operation Overdrive and Jungle Fury's years, Jetix would be like 24/7, you know, airing whatever that was on at the time, and Toon Disney was becoming no more by that point. So it was really more, you know, it was quite a refresher from what we've known about this. And while I did not like how Disney handled Power Rangers during the 2000s, from 2002 up until 2009, but there was at least a few things I did like about their era in terms of how they broadcast it. Like I said, bringing up about Jetix during Dino Thunder through Jungle Fury and how they had the whole daytime stuff on ABC Family with it, and then primetime hours on Toon Disney. So that was good. Plus, their blocks for like reruns of older Power Ranger seasons before Disney took over with the Saban era stuff from Mighty Morphin through Time Force, which was another thing that I liked back during the Wild Force run of the show. And during Wild Force's season 20 years ago, we had first off the Best of Power Rangers block, which now Mighty Morphin had like a lot of episodes under his belt. So during their Best of Power Rangers block, when it came to rerunning Mighty Morphin, from what I remember, it was like you would show a few episodes of MMPR, but mostly the story-centric episodes, because all the filler episodes of MMPR, mostly its first two seasons, there were like a lot of those episodes. So how was you going to rerun all that MMPR on your Best of PR block all at once? How was that possible back then? So it's best only do reruns of like some of the fan favorite episodes like Gung Ho, which introduced Titanus and the Island of Illusion parts 1 and 2, which give us the Ultra Zord combo. But there's some episodes they had to skip because, you know, recently it was 2002 and we were already at the start of this post 9/11 era of television. And especially when Disney started taking over Power Rangers. Time Force had already finished. And also, I also liked how they would rerun all of Time Force on ABC Family in the morning, because I was an elementary school kid during that time when they would show reruns of Time Force on the weekdays and weekday mornings on ABC Family before I would go to school, because elementary school kids would go to school around 8 o'clock and stuff. So that would give me enough time to wait for the school bus and stuff. You know, get a little fix of Power Rangers before I go to school, which was cool 20 years ago for me at that time. But on weekends, they would do the Best of Power Rangers block, I believe. I believe they did the Best of Power Rangers block they always did it on Saturdays from what I remembered, because from the first thing they did was do reruns of Mighty Morphin. I was wondering whether if they were going to do some episodes of MMPR and then jump to another season, but no, MMPR had 3 seasons, so they had to do some episodes of season 1 for reruns because there were just like too many episodes of season 1 to rerun. So you only have to do only reran some of the best episodes of season 1, whether it be the Greenwood Evil story or the Green Candle story or Island of Illusion or the Island of Illusion 2-parter. Of course, you didn't want to do Doomsday because, you know, and Return of an Old Friend, the Trick or Treat episode with Pumpkin Rapper, and probably 1 or 2 more episodes from season 1 for reruns on Best of Power Rangers, and then jump straight to season 2 MMPR territory for reruns with like the Mutiny and then White Light, because, you know, back then, when I was a kid, how did Tommy, you know, I was always baffled whenever they did reruns of Mighty Morphin, like how did Tommy lose the Green Ranger powers for good, and then all of a sudden I jump into White Ranger era with Tommy and all of that back then, you know. And then, of course, the power transfer for reruns on ABC Family, and then even later what Jetix was doing with it. Then they probably skipped a couple of episodes for season 2 that were probably not noteworthy, unless if you want to rerun a particular peculiar I can't even get that word. Peculiar Rocky episode called Rocky Just Wants to Have Fun from season 2, or something like that. And then you go into like Rangers Back in Time, and then The Wedding, Return of the Green Ranger, and then season 3 reruns on the block, Ninja Quest, and then you just skip straight to Ranger Catastrophe, Changing of the Zords, Follow That Cab, Different Shade of Pink, the Master Vile 3-parter, Rangers in Reverse, skip Alien Rangers, go straight to Zeo, the whole 9 yards. And the way how they did that was a great way to condense how far we were in Power Rangers history. Especially following, Disney's ownership. Because, again, how was I going, you think I was going to watch all MMPR for a couple weeks straight in reruns? And in fact, they had over 100 some, but they had a buttload of over 100 some episodes over the 3 seasons, while Zeo had 50. And even then, even speaking of Time Force again, when it came to the reruns for that on ABC Family and Jetix, and even what we got right now, even when Netflix was still streaming all of Power Rangers until they took most of those seasons off. When you watch Time Force, even back when all of Power Rangers was just on Netflix, Time Force is still the post 9/11 cuts of most episodes, because again, we already lost those pre 9/11 cuts where all that building destruction and stuff and all the terroristic speeching from Rancic and stuff was cut out. So we're only still, once again, all these years later after Time Force's initial run in 2001, we're still stuck with those post 9/11 cuts of the show. Even on the Shout Factory DVD, and even now with Time Force now on the official Power Rangers YouTube channel. At the time of this recording, Power Rangers Official had already, in Hasbro, had finished, uploading all episodes of Lightspeed Rescue, and now they're getting started on streaming every episode of Time Force onto YouTube, on the official Power Rangers YouTube channel. And so, even on the YouTube uploads of those episodes in full, it's still the post 9/11 cuts of Time Force. So, and okay, but speaking of Wild Force, now the episodes that were, I remember even back during Wild Force's run, like the episodes that were airing, that had aired on Fox Kids, would also be repeated onto ABC Family, which was a good thing they did. But of course, by the time Fox Kids ended in September 2002, around my 10th birthday 20 years ago, and when Fox Kids became the Fox Box, when we had shows like Kirby and Ultraman Tiga that time, for those who were young enough back then like I was, and old enough now to remember all of that and how this all took place, when Fox Box became that thing, Power Rangers retreated to ABC Family. And even ABC Kids was born. And I remember the ABC Kids block, but my local ABC affiliate station where I live at didn't air Power Rangers, throughout the entirety of the Disney era with ABC Kids. Because my ABC affiliate station, when they did had the ABC Kids block, because this was when they were already phasing out of that ABC One Saturday Morning block that they had throughout the 90s up until mid-2002. And my ABC Kids affiliate station mostly did reruns of Disney Channel stuff that was out at the time and popular at the time, like Kim Possible. And so it was impossible for Power Rangers to appear on my ABC affiliate station. So instead, I'd rather watch it on ABC Family, which was an alternative, because ABC Family, when it was still that name of a channel, was a cable station. But I also got the because my DirecTV is a satellite TV service. They have cable channels like ABC Family, but now it's freeform now. But that was nice. And then also Toon Disney, because I don't think I ever had Toon Disney back when I used to have cable growing up. But satellite, we would have a lot of channels we didn't get on cable back in the day. So So that was, that was fair and on that. But upon that, though, speaking of Wild Force, when I discuss the retrospective for the season next time, that when the show was still in its first half, when it was doing its first half of episodes on Fox, Wild Force was doing fine in its first chunk of episodes. I really enjoyed the show. When acting and writing wise, Wild Force was doing pretty good. But of course, it was not going to be as good as Time Force or anything of that nature. But Wild Force was very astounding in this first chunk of episodes. But I would say once Disney fully took over for the remainder of the season, in terms of airing those remaining 20 episodes, I believe, or so, or 16, I don't know how many episodes now. Because Wild Force was the last Power Ranger season to run for 40 episodes since Lightspeed Rescue and Time Force did 40 episodes apiece for their seasons. Wild Force was the last season, so I think it was about like the last 16 episodes or so. Disney was going to take over, airing the remaining episodes, and there was like certain full-on production control for the remaining half of the show. So that I can recall. And after the Master's Last Stand, which was Master Org's origin episode, and with the reveal of Cole's parents being murdered by Master Org when he was once Dr. Adler, a human. After that, that was actually the final episode of Power Rangers to air on Fox Kids, because Disney was already taking over and Fox Box was becoming the new norm at that time, until it would later become 4Kids TV for Fox Box. But, I wasn't really keen on Fox Box back then. I was not even a fan of its programming that they had in lineup, like Ultraman Tiga mostly. But even though I was never really an Ultraman fan, even though Ultraman is part of Tokusatsu, like, Kamen Rider, Sentai, and Power Rangers and all that, but I was never into Ultraman. Yes, I've seen episodes of Ultraman Tiga, but I have never, ever cared about it. And even whatever stuff they had on Fox Box, well, save for Sonic X and the 2003 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series, which was one of, basically the animated Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series I grew up in and had a handful of action figures and stuff at that time, with my fandom for TMNT. But I digress. So after but by the time Wild Force started jumping more onto being exclusively on Disney networks, ABC Kids and ABC Family, by that point, my interest for the season started falling apart. Well, save for Forever Red. Forever Red, I finally was more hyped up for that episode when I was a kid at 10 years old with Forever Red. But the episodes sandwiched in between Forever Red, like the episodes with Animus and Kite, and the episodes with Gendrax and Toxica's last bit of development, and then that Ninja Org, Orakage, or whatever his name was, yeah, and then the finale, end of the Power Rangers. I think Wild Force fell apart for me by the second half, because I knew there was a bit of a shift in terms of where they were writing the rest of the season, and but Forever Red, again, was the highlight of Wild Force, just like Reinforcements from the Future was, and the Zenaku story. So, therefore, the rest of Wild Force in between those episodes fell apart for me. And I was starting to lose interest in Power Rangers that first moment, from the moment they, especially when, the Animus stuff did got on my nerves as a kid. I'll talk a little bit more about that in that retrospective soon. But I just really fell apart on Wild Force in its latter half by the time Disney fully took over during the fall 2002 TV season. So, but however, Wild Force's conclusion saved the Power Rangers from cancellation. But again, when I do a video next time talking about the many times Power Rangers was nearly canceled or ended, because Wild Force's ending, the end of the Power Rangers, was intended to be once again another finale to the franchise overall. But however, Wild Force did save Power Rangers from cancellation, which allowed Disney to consider what's next for the franchise after this era of seasons that were under the pseudonym subsidiary of the franchise, MMPR Productions. And so going forward with, the next season, Power Rangers Ninja Storm, eventually this season on the podcast, I'll talk about the Hexagon stuff, because Power Rangers Hexagon is probably something I've always wanted to talk about on my podcast, but I'll delve into that whenever I feel like it, so cross your fingers. And if I have time to do such a video about it. Because I know I've waited 8 years to talk about Hexagon on my podcast, and I just never got around it for so long, for 8 years. Okay, so then you go into Ninja Storm. This was Disney's first full-blown produced season of Power Rangers. Now, what was so unique about Ninja Storm back when it was airing, back when I first watched it even, Ninja Storm felt different from the moment I watched it, and I noticed something was different in terms of how they shot Power Rangers starting the season and where they started filming the show, because until I started discovering Wikipedia around Jungle Fury's era, 2008, and when I was still in high school, when I had to keep my secret of loving Power Rangers away from those I went to high school and stuff with, I did not know, even up until when I looked up Power Rangers on Wikipedia, that I had no idea that the show, starting with Ninja Storm and during Disney's run with it at this point in time, Power Rangers was being filmed now in New Zealand. And even to this day, with the Neo, Saban, and Hasbro eras, Power Rangers is still being filmed in New Zealand today. And, we've been in New Zealand, the show's been in New Zealand for almost nearly, come next year, 20 years since Ninja Storm. And that's been a really long time since we last had been, it just makes me wonder, now after Dino Fury is done, what's next for Power Rangers? Are they still going to film seasons in New Zealand, or are they going to relocate production on the show elsewhere? Or I don't know, because as much as I like New Zealand and its environments and where they filmed Power Rangers and what other shows in New Zealand were filmed concurrently, like how Power Rangers was being filmed there, but I just feel like after almost 20 years since Ninja Storm, you would think it's time Power Rangers relocated production from New Zealand to something like, I don't know, Canada somewhere. Canada is a lot more cheaper like New Zealand when it comes to their productions of film and television. Maybe Power Rangers should probably, with Hasbro, thinking about moving production of the show to Canada or something. Because New Zealand, I like New Zealand, but what else can you do over in New Zealand to film Power Rangers? New Zealand's a really small island, and and such over in near Australia and all that, but where else can you do in New Zealand? Where else can you go to film the show? You've been filming the show in every single jungle environment in New Zealand. You filmed the show in every city district in New Zealand. It's are we running out of places in New Zealand to film the show now or something? Because that's what it feels like. And I don't know. That's what I'm thinking, because I noticed that the even when I watched all of Ninja Storm, and even when we had Dino Thunder, SPD, Mystic Force, and so forth, I noticed Power Rangers wasn't filmed in the United States anymore, because I noticed the change in actors and the locality of the actors that they chose for the Ninja Storm, Dino Thunder, and such Rangers, except for Rangers that we had here that have been filming the show since it was still here, being filmed in California stateside. Well, even though I live in Maryland watching the show, but if I lived in California when the show was still being filmed, it would have been nice. But as a Maryland Power Rangers fan, but still, I noticed the difference from how Saban seasons were produced versus how Disney, Neo, Saban, and Hasbro was filming the show in New Zealand. Because most of the majority of the actors that they got in New Zealand for Power Rangers were mostly all New Zealanders and a few Kiwis and some Australian actors. And then you have your mix of American actors in the productions, bringing more diversity to these seasons, because not only that, New Zealand, I don't know what to say otherwise about their acting, in their film and television division, because, it's like they don't have that much talent I can think of that is very notable in New Zealand. Yeah, sure, the Lord of the Rings trilogy that Peter Jackson did was happening around that time, but by the time of Ninja Storm, Lord of the Rings Return of the King was just a thing at that time. So, you know, I knew then and there, even then, Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy was shot in New Zealand. So, yeah. So I noticed something was there within that connection. And why do you think, if it weren't for the Lord, and speaking of that, if it weren't for the Lord of the Rings trilogy, we would have never even discovered the late Bruce Allpress, who would later become the Jungle Fury Elephant Spirit Ranger and aka Master Fant in Jungle Fury. So that was something. And of course, there have been a few New Zealand talent that have been in some of our American movies. Heck, speaking of Jungle Fury again, the guy, you know, that actor who played Master Mao in Jungle Fury, I spotted him in the Matrix sequels. Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions. Awkward. Yeah, not only that, a lot of majority of actors that have been in the Disney era Power Rangers, when we had mostly all New Zealand talent and some American talent, but when it came to mostly our New Zealand talent, now, Kelson Henderson, James Galen, John Tui, Michelle Langstone, I do recall those people because they have been in numerous Power Ranger productions ever since the show has started filming in New Zealand. But it's just a lot of New Zealand talent we had in Power Rangers. I know their faces, but I just have a hard time remembering most of their names. Now, with the exception of the cast from RPM and some actors from Jungle Fury, I really never really cared much for the actors from like Dino Thunder or Mystic Force all that much, or Operation Overdrive's actors. Although Samuel Benta is from London, black British dude to play a black Power Ranger. But again, when I get to Operation Overdrive later in the video, you know, we really had like a really mixture of like American talent, some UK talent, Australian talent, and of course our main batch of acting talent from yours truly, New Zealand, to be in these seasons of Power Rangers during this era. I mean, we had plenty of that also in like some of Neo Saban, like Beast, Dino Charge. But again, we're not talking about those seasons. We're talking about Disney's Power Rangers. But yeah, but Ninja Storm though was so different in a way where we had our first Yellow Ranger to be a man and our first Blue Ranger to be a woman. We also didn't have this was our first Power Rangers to not have a African American member by any means. Although some people think the late Pua Magasiva, who played Shane, the Red Ninja Storm Ranger, was black, like a New Zealand type black dude or something. When really he's actually a Kiwi or so, or was that somebody else in the cast? I don't know, but you know, Pua, he's not black, but I mean, I can't tell what but he's actually Samoan, so he was Samoan, but you know, rest in peace, Pua. But yeah, but Ninja Storm was different, and even Grant McFarlane, well, he was a New Zealander, and you know, rest in peace to him as well, who played our beloved Sensei Wakanabe and our, you know, comic relief villain of Lothor. So I knew something was different. Plus, there have been a few actors that I've noticed that also were in New Zealand television productions that also made it into Power Rangers. I had no idea the actress who played Capri, Katrina Brown. Yeah, we had two actresses named Capri, which was Katrina, which was irony. The two Katrinas who played Capri and Mara, but although the first Katrina, the one who played Capri, one of Lothor's nieces in Ninja Storm, she was just in a few episodes or so of Xena Warrior Princess. But that was back when Xena was going off the air at this point, and I didn't know. And then I believe, and again, and also the actor who played Blake, the Navy Thunder Ranger. He was just, I remember I saw him in an episode when I was watching some reruns of Stargate SG-1, and he was in an episode of Stargate. Before I didn't know, before he was even in Power Rangers, he was on Stargate SG-1 for one episode. I didn't know. Damn. So kudos for whoever the casting director was for these seasons to get some really well-known talent for people for the cast of Ninja Storm. Wow. Yeah. But other than that, Ninja Storm, when I first watched it and when it aired its 38 episodes, the first chunk of Ninja Storm was doing all right, but then upon later on, as soon as we got to the third and final episode of the first Thunder Ranger story in Ninja Storm, I started to notice how Ninja Storm started being more emphasized on comedy as opposed to drama. I wasn't fond of Ninja Storm's comedy at first, but upon my rewatch now as I gotten older, the comedy and it being more of a breaking the fourth wall, tongue-in-cheek tone started to make a lot more sense, because this was before I even knew about Sentai, and when I saw Hurricaneger for the very first time, Hurricaneger was the same way as well, but I felt like Hurricaneger, when I even watched more of that in Sentai, that Hurricaneger was kind of dramatic, but it had a good balance of drama and comedy. But Ninja Storm was more comedy than drama. But I can see where I was a bit split on it for so long. But now, it's a highly understandable why Disney went with that approach. Because they felt like, the past seasons, since Power Rangers in Space until the last season, Wild Force, they were so dramatic. Yeah, where was the fun in those seasons? Like, man, where is the fun and the goofiness of Power Rangers? Let's inject that back into the show in our first full-blown season with Ninja Rangers, in which they did. But we did have a few bits of drama, in Ninja Storm, especially like in the Samurai's Journey 3-parter and Shane's Karma. But every episode of Ninja Storm was comedy, and comedy. And again, I wasn't fond of the comedy. I mean, I liked the character stuff and some of the stuff Ninja Storm did, but I was just, I wasn't sure whether if the comedy was worth laughing about, the fourth wall jokes, the tongue-in-cheekness of it. I wasn't sure whether if I liked it or not. But other than that, I liked the Rangers from Ninja Storm. Actually, all of them. And my favorite of the bunch was basically Tori. Because she was our first female Blue Ranger. So, and heck, I even had back when I was a kid, up until I was 15 years old, we used to have a cat that we named after the Blue Ranger. We had a cat named Tori, and we named her after the Blue Ninja Storm Ranger. Kudos. Okay, Dino Thunder was a big gamble for me here, because, now, Dino Thunder, I did watch all of that in its entirety back in 2004 as I was finishing up elementary school and I was about to start middle school, and I was also near the age of 12 by the time Dino Thunder aired. And again, Jason David Frank's involvement was because due to an offer he got from Douglas Sloan to return the Power Rangers after a long absence after Turbo. And Dino Thunder was a special treat of a season, because Dino Thunder felt like a anniversary, but it wasn't like a big rounded numbered anniversary or anything. It was just basically the 12th anniversary of Power Rangers, but again, going by Zoo Ranger years at the time, still with the franchise. And knowing the fact Ninja Storm should have been like the 10th anniversary of Power Rangers, because 2003 was actually 10 years after 93, but since Wild Force was an anniversary, so it felt like we were a year ahead from an actual anniversary year. So Ninja Storm should have been like 10 years of Power Rangers instead of Wild Force. But again, we were still going by Zoo Ranger years with the show at this point. And and Dino Thunder, what was so special about it? Even though when I was a young child, I already got the references to MMPR was certain episodes that were, episode titles that were referenced to MMPR Season 1 episodes. Like Day of the Dino, obviously, play on Day of the Dumpster. Star is Torn, basically based off that one filler episode, Star is Born, which was a Scorpina and her pet worm monster in the Rangers on the Beach episode. Some episodes like that, and also all the callbacks to Mighty Morphin, which was nice. Trent Mercer being, the evil White Ranger, callback to when Tommy was the evil Green Ranger. Yeah, that was nice. And then also what I liked about Dino Thunder was, thinking back to when Disney still had the show again. Disney treated Power Ranger, Disney, when they did Power Rangers during their first full-blown season, they wanted to treat Ninja Storm like the other seasons hardly ever happened, but luckily for Dino Thunder, we had to retcon Ninja Storm, ignoring the previous seasons, and have Ninja Storm actually in continuity with the rest of the other seasons for Dino Thunder to connect all of those seasons. But why do you think Tommy had that not so, it was a well done, somewhat semi-well done, but rushed and not really all that great video diary history of the history of Power Rangers? That being the 500th episode of the franchise, Legacy of Power. And knowing the fact, when we got to that episode, 500 episodes was a massive achievement for any kid show for that time, let alone an action-adventure live-action kid show like Power Rangers, which was impressive again for 2004 and for Power Rangers to do. And it was just right around the 4th episode of Dino Thunder, because the last 3 episodes of Dino Thunder Start was episodes 497, 498, and 499. So episode 4 of Dino Thunder was going to be episode 500 of Power Rangers. And so it made sense for 500 episodes. Let's celebrate it by doing a abridged recap by Tommy about the history of Power Rangers. Well, yeah, but again, Tommy's video diary, which I already discussed in my fan commentary, go listen to what I said about that episode of Legacy of Power on my YouTube channel. But yeah, Dino Thunder was very good, although I've glossed on some things from it. But upon multiple rewatches, I start to appreciate some stuff they did more and more, especially with villains like Mesogog, with him and Anton Mercer with that Jekyll and Hyde thing going on with him, which was cool. Zeltrax, I liked how they threw a bone at Tommy fighting Zeltrax a lot, because in Power Ranger stance, it was more like paying homage to all the times Tommy would fight Goldar when he was the Green and White Rangers, with Tommy as the Black Ranger fighting Zeltrax, which was nice. And with the main Ranger trio of Connor, Ethan, and Kira being a callback to, basically Connor was just basically like a jock version, a goofy jock version of Jason. Ethan was just like a hybrid between Zach and Billy, while Kira was a hybrid of Trini and Kimberly, but leaning more on Kimberly's side, but for the Yellow Ranger slot. And Trent was more like the White Ranger, New Day White Ranger version of when Tommy was the Green Ranger. So yeah, all that stuff was great with Dino Thunder. Okay, SPD was fascinating. When you get the Power Rangers SPD, I've said this before, in my retrospective for the show and my thing about the Disney era stuff. Back in 2018. Now, SPD, I was already in middle school at this point. I didn't want to tell people I was in the Power Rangers back then still, but I just had Power Rangers in the background most of the time during this point, because again, around SPD through RPM, I just had Power Rangers in the background because I was still in middle school and high school, and I was into other things still at this time. So I still watched SPD, Mystic Force, Overdrive, Jungle Fury, when they were airing. But I told you guys when I get to RPM, that again, SPD, between SPD through Jungle Fury, when the show was still airing on Jetix, I just had Power Rangers in the background because I had other things on my mind, like PlayStation 2 games, and I was watching G4 TV with shows like X-Play and Attack of the Show and all that at the time, when I was younger. And I was also into what movie franchises were very popular during the 2000s. Of course, since this year is the 20th anniversary of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, particularly the first one, And then we had the Harry Potter movies and Shrek and Pirates of the Caribbean. We were this close. Well, 2005 we had Batman Begins and Fantastic Four at the time, and then a couple of other films that were very big at that year in 2005. And then 2006, whatever movies came out that year, like Mission Impossible 3 and X-Men The Last Stand when Mystic Force was out. Operation Overdrive, of course, Spider-Man 3, The Simpsons movie, Transformers, Michael Bay's Transformers, or Bayformers for short, and Harry Potter's 5th movie, and all that other stuff that was out that year. And then 2008 would give us the best Batman movie ever out of The Dark Knight, and Iron Man, Tropic Thunder, Kung Fu Panda, all those movies in 2008 when Jungle Fury was out. And then, of course, 2009 RPM was Terminator, the year we had such blockbuster films like Terminator Salvation, Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, and, of course, G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra when RPM aired. But, I was really more into that stuff than I was Power Rangers because, at this point, Power Rangers was kind of, how I was about how Disney was taking over it, because by this point, while I mind and mended Ninja Storm and Dino Thunder and how Disney did those seasons, and like I said before in my retrospects, in the last 2 times I talked about the Disney era, and probably in one whole video if I could, I think that, SPD was when I started having a problem with how Disney was handling Power Rangers. When Bruce Kalish came on as a showrunner from SPD through Jungle Fury. Whenever I think the reason why I had Power Rangers in the background during most of this point, and when Kalish was involved, I didn't really like how the fight scenes in most of SPD through Jungle Fury were handled. Well, see, when I look at the fight scenes from the original Saban seasons, including the first 2 Disney seasons of Ninja Storm and Dino Thunder again, I mean, the fight scenes were more well choreographed, but when, one of the common problems I had with the remaining part of the Disney era before RPM and after Dino Thunder and before RPM, SPD through Jungle Fury, when I get now the fight scenes they did for because I noticed how while they were adapting still Sentai for Power Rangers, they relied less heavy on Sentai footage because there were parts of Deca Ranger through Geki Rangers footages that were probably pretty much way too violent to have for Power Rangers, so they basically just went and did new footage to cover up from what was done in Sentai earlier. And Kalish basically, the Kalish explosions, that was a common issue. I never really liked the way how whenever we had fight scenes with the front explosions and back explosions, I hated how the fight scenes were shot in SPD through Jungle Fury because they just felt lazy to me, in my opinion, especially whenever we get these big explosion shots. You get your full frame shot and then you get your close-up shot. You guys should know what I'm talking about. If you go back and watch SPD, Mystic Force, Operation Overdrive, and Jungle Fury, you'll know what I'm talking about. And if you've already seen those seasons, great, because when you watch those fight scenes, like the fight scenes in SPD through Jungle Fury in American footage were so haphazardly put together to the point the fight scenes, the explosions, and especially you get your close-ups, you got your full shot, then close-up, and the editing of the fight scenes are just so bad to the point, man, I'm like, am I even watching Power Rangers or am I watching, I even made this joke upon multiple modern rewatches of SPD. I'm like, am I watching Power Rangers or am I watching a Michael Bay production version of a Power Rangers? What the heck? But for television. But let me repeat that. Am I even watching Power Rangers anymore, or am I watching some Michael Bay production of sorts, but with Power Rangers in it, with those explosions? But at least with Michael Bay movies, like the explosions, even like the Transformers movies, at least with Michael Bay's movies, the explosions were at least more creative. But when you look at because given that Power Rangers is like 90% fight scenes and stuff, while you do have your bits of story and character development stuff, but between SPD through Jungle Fury, which was during Bruce Kalish's show running time, when Disney still took over Power Rangers. The fight scenes. Every time I look at the fight scenes with those explosions, they are so lazy. You get your full, like again, your full shot, then you get a close-up shot of the same shot, and then back to full shot again. And then just like, my God. And then, of course, the fight scenes, you know, the Rangers, you know, they don't, you know, yell ah and stuff when they get blown up or getting zapped or whatever. Most of the time, starting with SPD, the Rangers just yell whoa when they get blown over and stuff. And again, even again, Linkara made a point about that in his original SPD review for History of Power Rangers. Go back and listen to this. You know, if you want to look, you know, again, go back to Linkara's iconic Cal Explosion rant from his SPD review. It's still up on YouTube. That someone uploaded somewhere if you can find it. But I know what I knew about the rant because I'm even doing my own twist on that rant because like that was probably what really turned me off with Power Rangers during this point of the Disney era. Nothing against SPD, Mystic Force, Overdrive, and Jungle Fury. Well, even though I kind of still have a love and hate relationship for Overdrive, but I really hated the Cal Explosion stuff. And while I do mend SPD through Jungle Fury being more mature, because the closest, well, again, when we get to RPM again, the closest we did for Power Rangers maturing from, you know, again, we were still doing more mature storytelling, but you still have to cater to children between ages 6 to 12 and some teenagers. Because, again, I was a teenager still watching Power Rangers secretly when I was still in middle school and high school. So, even when I was a teenager, I was still watching Power Rangers, but I still had it. But, again, like I said, during the SPD through RPM period, I had Power Rangers in the background because, again, I was a teenager in middle school and high school, and I was dealing with teenage problems and stuff like depression and all that other stuff that teenagers between 13 through 17, 18 or whatever do and go through. So that was probably why I had Power Rangers in the back burner when I was that young 2 decades ago. Because I also didn't want people to know back when I was in middle school and high school, Gaithersburg Middle School and High School, in that special ed program, I was in the Power Rangers back then. Because that's why I used something like Spider-Man or The Incredibles or Napoleon Dynamite or the Nolan Batman films pre-Dark Knight Rises or Michael Bay's Transformers to cover all this up. Because I know, given the public stigma back then during Power Rangers' first decade after it happened since the 90s, and going into the 2000s era of Power Rangers, especially the Disney stuff, you know, from Wild Force through RPM, I was just like, you know, I just don't want people to know I'm in the Power Rangers still, even when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, until I finally came out at age 18 that I'm a Power Rangers fan by the time of the 12th grade, but, you know, rest was history. So, you know, SPD was what it was. You know, you had your very captivating concepts and characters with Doggy Kruger, Sky Tate, and all that, Emperor Grum. But I just really hated the Cal Explosion stuff in SPD. But man, once you get to Mystic Force, Operation Overdrive, and Jungle Fury, oh my God. Mostly Mystic Force and Operation Overdrive with the Cal Explosions. Ugh. And some of the stuff they did, story and character-wise. Now, Mystic Force was basically Power Rangers meets Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings to me. And again, Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings were very popular film franchises at the time at this point. But I feel like Mystic Force came out, well, if Maji Ranger in Sentai had happened a few years earlier, they would have picked up on the Harry Potter craze rather than, let's say, Sentai back after Gal Ranger. They had instead of having Hurricane Ranger, Abba Ranger, and Deca Ranger happening before Maji Ranger, they should have had Maji Ranger somewhere around the Harry Potter craze that was still going on at the time. But Lord of the Rings, now the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy was already old news by this point of Mystic Force with Power Rangers at this point. So, what fantasy adventure film with dragons or sorcery was out at this time in 2006, but later after Mystic Force ended? Aragon. And personally, I don't care. I never cared about Aragon. I remember seeing TV spots for that movie and stuff back in the day, but I never really gave a shit about Aragon. And I still don't today. But Harry Potter was still fresh in my mind. Well, Yeah, until the damn Twilight movies had to happen. Well, that was around Jungle Fury when the Twilight movie started, and even RPM. So, Mystic Force, there were some things I kind of do like about it now than I did back then, because I was 13, going on 14 years old back then when Mystic Force aired, and when I was still in middle school when it happened. Mystic Force, I didn't get into the backstory stuff they were talking about all the time throughout the whole season. I know it was more about Udana and Lianbo and Daggeron and Korag and all of that stuff that was going on in that backstory. And it was hardly ever, like Linkara put it back in his Mystic Force review for History of Power Rangers, that Mystic Force wasn't really a Power Ranger season. It just happened to have all this Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings backstory, folklore, and all this stuff, and such stuff like that happens to have Power Rangers in it. That's what that's what the season was. I mean, again, if you liked Mystic Force, more power to you, but Mystic Force, I don't know what to say about that season, but there was a few things I still liked about it. I still liked Rangers like Chip and Xander. You know how much I hate Nick as a Red Ranger, because even though Mystic Force was all about him, but again, when we would get to Samurai at the start of the Neo Saban era, Samurai was the Jaden show. Well, like I've said before on this podcast, and even all these years later, if Samurai was the Jaden show, Mystic Force was the Nick show. So there you go. And don't get me started with Korag boasting about honor and crap. Every time I hear a Korag boast about honor out of all of that, that shitty characterization, even Wolzard and Maji Ranger were the same way. He puts Ecliptor and Villamax in the shame about the word honor. It just gets on my nerves. And yeah, but Mystic Force, I didn't really care for that season, but it started to grow on me more and more. I watched it as I got older. So then you get to, of course, Operation Overdrive. Now, Operation Overdrive, again, Overdrive was basically, as seen for a long time, one of the worst seasons of Power Rangers ever. It's still one of the worst seasons of the show in terms of, horrible writing, terrible characters, and the overall execution. Well, I did like some of the things it did, like, the treasure hunting aspects, the serialization of how the Rangers would get a certain artifact that is linked to the crown, a certain crown jewel, a jewel of the crown of the Corona Aurora. And then it would also, all that other stuff they did, that Indiana Jones Around the World in 80 Days sort of stuff that they did, and all that globe-trotting stuff, which they also did. And it was nice that they did that kind of stuff. But personally, though, now recently, months ago at the start of 2022, upon my watches of Sentai, I never watched it before, but especially for counterparts of the Power Ranger shows that I have seen, but I've never saw the Japanese versions of. After I watched Abba Ranger, Deca Ranger, and Maji Ranger, I finally got to sit down somewhere to watch Bukenger. And when I watched Bukenger, in comparison to Operation Overdrive, now Bukenger was more treasure hunting, globetrotting heavy than Operation Overdrive ever was. Because at least with Bukenger, the characters were more likable in the Sentai as opposed to in the Power Rangers version. Well, say for the main head villain of some of the factions for Bukenger, High Priest Gaia. I'm sorry if I'm butchering his name wrong. For some people, forgive me though, because although that was the thing with Bukenger versus Operation Overdrive, because even when I watched it, Bukenger was more convincing to me with the treasure hunting aspect and the characters and stuff in the story. Because in comparison to Operation Overdrive, what did Overdrive had in common to Bukenger? Well, nothing basically, because Bukenger had not Bukenger, Operation Overdrive, they just, the Rangers were assholes. The villains, I just couldn't get a good gauge on them. Besides, well, again, the best of the bunch with the villain factions for Overdrive, in my opinion, were the Fear Cats. At least the Fear Cats actually did interesting stuff than Flurious or Camdor, Emiratrix, or Moltor and their respective factions. Even though the Questers / the Fear Cats, again, they did more. So, and they were more interesting. And even though I do like the Fear Cats designs. So, but I just felt like the problem with Operation Overdrive was that, you know, I just felt like, you know, by this point, you know, I was already finishing up middle school at this point in life. And by this point, I was starting up high school in fall of 15 years ago. I can't believe this year is my 15th anniversary since I started high school. And, man, Operation Overdrive was just terrible. And even after it ended, I hadn't looked back on Operation Overdrive until, like, recently, like, with the DVDs and Netflix. Even back when Netflix was still streaming all of Power Rangers. But Operation Overdrive was just painful. Like, even when I only watched Overdrive for a few episodes to get a sense of how bad it really seemed. And then when I even watched Linkar's History of Power Rangers video for it back in 2014 during Super Mega Force, and thinking back to the last anniversary season of Power Rangers, because concurrently Operation Overdrive was, like, you know, concurrently Super Mega Force was airing when Linkara put out his Operation Overdrive review for History of Power Rangers. And I remember how Overdrive, I forgot how horrendous Overdrive was as opposed to Megaforce and Super Megaforce. And even, yeah, Megaforce is still, you know, worse, but Overdrive was just bad. Like, it was just a poorly crafted season with some really horrible Rangers, too many villains to, you know, give a flying fuck about. And I just, like, oh my god, like, there was just too much of everything with Overdrive. No wonder they called the show Operation Overdrive for a reason. And I just did not get into it somehow. Eventually I would pick them on Overdrive, but yeah, this show is still bad. Like, while there was some good things I still liked about it, and there were some characters I liked in Overdrive, again, the only villains I liked from Operation Overdrive was the Fear Cats. The only Ranger I ever liked of the bunch was Rose, the Pink Ranger. The only supporting character I ever give a crap about was the damn Butler Spencer. Everybody else, I just didn't give a fuck about in Operation Overdrive. So the only characters I only liked was the Fear Cats for villains, the Pink Ranger, and the Butler for the supporting characters. The only 3 characters I cared about from Operation Overdrive. That's sad. That's real sad. So, but enough of Overdrive. Let's get to Jungle Fury. Now, the reason why I wasn't into Jungle Fury in retrospect, nothing against characters like RJ or Dominic or Camille or Jarrett when possessed by Daishi, or the Pai Shui masters like Master Mao or Master Fant or Master Swoop or whoever, but okay, Jungle Fury, I can see why a lot of people, you know, I can see why Jungle Fury is a Power Ranger show nobody hardly talks about. You know, Jungle Fury is good, but it's just criminally underrated, and even in my opinion, it's criminally underrated. I mean, it's no underrated than, let's say, Wild Force, which I already talked about at the start of the video a little bit. But Jungle Fury was a season of Power Rangers I definitely had in the background, especially, again, 2008 was the year we had the economic recession. We were getting out of the Bush era of, the Bush era of America, and we were about to slowly transition into Obama's America. And then we also had, of course, in cinema, the best Batman movie ever out of The Dark Knight with Heath Ledger's Why So Serious Joker and all of that. And all that in 2008. And also the economic recession. So Jungle Fury, I never really gave it much of thought when it aired. Maybe it's because, in retrospect, the reason why I didn't care for Jungle Fury was because I thought back to how horrendous Operation Overdrive was, to the point Overdrive nearly wanted me to stop watching Power Rangers because of how bad the show would probably get at some points. But I know, again, when I get to RPM, Jungle Fury had some good things about it, but it felt like it was just a bunch of fluff. While I didn't mind the character stuff and the martial arts action in Jungle Fury and how realistic and how far we've come with martial arts action in Power Rangers since the old days, but Jungle Fury's martial arts was kind of very influenced by like something from the likes of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, but with Power Rangers and, you know, that kind of martial arts. The character stuff, well, was kind of engaging, especially with Jared and Camille and, you know, characters like our, you know, main trio and RJ and the Pai Schwa Masters. So, but Jungle Fury was kind of a sleeper hit of a Power Ranger season, and I think it's hard to talk about it now than what I could have talked about earlier. But now we get to RPM. You know, the last fully produced season of Power Rangers. Everybody's favorite season of the era and probably all of Power Rangers. Now, like I've said before in my past and based on my retrospective with this era, the Disney era, you know, was now nearing its end, and we were at the end of the 2000s at this point, entering the decade where I was in so much pain, misery, and massive amount of darkness with the 2010s. But RPM, now I may have said some cruel, harsh things about RPM in the past, even on this podcast notwithstanding. But upon multiple rewatches of RPM, yeah, there's some characters I still don't like Tanaya 7. I still don't care for Tanaya though. But with the entire RPM Ranger cast, with like Dylan and, you know, Ziggy and Summer in them, and then Dr. K and Colonel Truman with the supporting cast, and Venjix for the main big bad for a computer virus villain. RPM was, well, again, I never watched it when it initially aired because I told you, for new viewers who didn't know, back when Power Rangers RPM aired, Disney had already disbanded the Toon Disney Gen X channel and rebranded that channel to Disney XD. RPM was supposed to be on Disney XD at the start, but Disney decided put RPM exclusively on ABC Kids. You know, that Disney Saturday morning block of stuff that I could not receive on my my affiliate station where Power Rangers should be present on that. So instead, I had to, in replacement, what piece of Ameritoku was out at the time in 2009 that I had to watch as a substitute on the CW. Kamen Rider Dragon Knight at the time. Yep. And, well, again, I wasn't fond of Kamen Rider Dragon Knight neither that year. And, well, I can see why, you know, I think that after not watching RPM initially, I knew I was going to have this bit of bitterness and resentment. And then when I even saw the fan reaction for RPM throughout the decade of the 2010s, when in my 12 years of being in the Power Rangers fan base since 2010 now, I've realized how much love and admiration and praise that RPM had, because the farthest that Power Rangers had gotten in maturity was RPM. And I know I wasn't fond of it at first, but yeah, you also had the whole, you know, arguments over that, you know, yeah, that they took a Sentai that was goofy in nature with the cars and stuff, and they had anime eyes and stuff, but try to see if we can try to make it more serious. And then, you know, I understand that, you know, it worked for RPM's story and stuff worked better than Go Onger. And at the time of recording this video, I'm currently watching Go Onger for the very first time in full, because at one point back in my time of trying to watch Sentai a decade ago, I did watch a few episodes of Go Onger, but I didn't fully pay much attention much of the characters and stuff. And some of the elements in Go Onger, besides the whole race cars with anime eyes and shit. So, but RPM was as dark as we can get for Power Rangers. And actually, RPM was dark as, let's say, the first Terminator movie for Power Rangers, if not Mad Max, because that's what that was the approach. It was basically, you know, RPM was just basically Power Rangers meets Terminator and Mad Max. And I can see why a lot of people loved RPM, because it was like Terminator, was like Mad Max, and a few other things that were, and especially the one effect we had. Speaking of Terminator, why do you think we had Terminator Salvation that year when RPM aired? And what X-Men spinoff came out that year as well? Wolverine Origins. Because you had a Black Ranger who was trying to discover who he really was, if he's human or android and stuff, and trying to figure out about his past, and and basically even Dylan was kind of like Wolverine, was like the Wolverine of Black Rangers. And also he was kind of like, since I'm a Sonic the Hedgehog fan, and a Power Rangers fan, Dylan was kind of like the Shadow the Hedgehog of Power Rangers. And that's kind of what I also got from out of him too. But even though I'm still not a fan of the whole Dylan and Tanaya being sibling thing, because I know that when Eddie Gazillion, with his vision for RPM, but after Disney fired him over some stuff after the Gold and Silver Ranger debuts, Judd Lim would come back for the rest of RPM to finish up Gazillion's vision, although adding, and then retreading some stuff we had from the last season, because Disney wanted to treat RPM like it was the last season of Power Rangers, and they did that. But did we really need to retread the Dylan and Tanaya, retread the Andros Corone stuff for Dylan and Tanaya in RPM? And I knew that even when I watched it the first time, I was like, wait, we've already been through this in Power Rangers before. Male Ranger looking for, his sister, who ends up being the female villain, and then, and then she's reprogrammed to be full on cyborg, and then later gets redemption at the end, and then we have this all-out invasion of the robots to conclude the season and make it like this is the end of the Power Rangers at one point. And I feel like we've been through that before. Power Rangers in space, hello? So... that was my attitude at the time. Well, actually, I didn't start watching RPM until 2013. 4 years after it had aired at that point. And during Megaforce, and during the Megaforce hiatus in the summer of 2013, I had started binge watching RPM in some source somehow. This was before I did, because again, I didn't have any of the Shout Factory DVDs yet or anything of the like to watch RPM. So therefore, RPM, I wasn't fond of it at first. I wasn't fond of some of the things it did, and I had bad mouth some of the stuff in the past about it. But now, as I got older and it's over more than 10 years since the season happened, I start to appreciate RPM. I started to appreciate it for taking Power Rangers to a much more height of maturity than we had from past seasons like In Space, Lost Galaxy, or Time Force, or Dino Thunder, or SPD. So it made sense for RPM to go further with something darker, like a sentient computer virus villain wiping out almost all of humanity, and everybody's dead. There's the apocalypse, there's the war with the machines and versus humanity, again like Terminator, and some bits of Mad Max sprinkled into that Terminator influence with Power Rangers. And while I may not be a big fan of post-apocalyptic storytelling unless if it's Terminator, but I was fond of that for being in Power Rangers. But although now we learned that even when we get the Samurai, when Power Rangers started getting all bogged down and stuff, and I know in my pains, and my growing pains with the Neo Saban era last decade, with all that Mighty Morphin influence and 90s nostalgia and stuff last decade, I can see why they decided to consider RPM a separate, an alternate dimension season of Power Rangers, but it's still part of the television show. And because if the apocalypse happened with the mainline universe, the main dimension of Power Rangers seasons, then that's what we thought at the time. Like RPM was supposed to be the end of Power Rangers, but then turned out it's not. It's just Disney just wanted to end Power Rangers so they can make Marvel and Star Wars bigger than ever. So there's your story about how I feel about these last 20 years after the Disney era of Power Rangers. But like I said about the MMPR 2010 revision, though, it was just like, oh my god, why did they even revision the first season? And I knew then and there Well, by the 2010s, I was already entering that world of all this cynicism, and because I was also becoming an adult, the days of being a child was over. I had reached age 18, well, by September of 12 years ago anyway, and I was joining the Power Rangers fan base via the Ranger Wiki when I was posting my Trakina-driven fanfic thing, which was my magnum opus for a long time until I moved on. And all that other stuff, Neo Saban, the movie we had that was a flop, and every other thing, painful thing during my difficult 20s. And now that I'm turning the big 30 now, my God, I feel old since all of this stuff now. Oh my God. So what are my final thoughts? If I would describe the season, the eras that we had of Power Rangers for almost nearly 30 years. The original Saban era, Mighty Morphin through Time Force, somewhat Wild Force, or the first chunk of Wild Force, was like the golden age of Power Rangers. Mid to late Wild Force, all the way to RPM, was like the silver age of Power Rangers. Neo Saban, Samurai through Super Ninja Steel was the dark age and bronze age of Power Rangers. And currently the Hasbro era, Beast Morphers and Dino Fury Current, is kind of like our Renaissance age, basically comparing what Disney did when Disney, even following the years after Walt Disney's death in the late 1960s after the release of the original Jungle Book movie. Because when you think about these eras of Power Rangers, I'm being reminded of how when Walt Disney and the Disney Empire was obstructed, and how the Disney respective eras of Disney was. Like the golden age of Disney was starting with Snow White all the way to up until about like Sleeping Beauty. The Silver Age was like all 1960s stuff, up until Walt Disney's death in 1967 with the Jungle Book, or was it 66, one of them. The Dark Age of Disney was like the 1970s up until 1988, and when, but even though Disney was getting at a point of death in the 1980s, because that's why Disney didn't put out a lot of animated features that time, because again, Disney back in the 80s, especially the early 1980s, Disney was falling apart with their woes of stuff, what was going on with their studio and their animated films, because, why are you thinking for a lot of us 90s and 2000s kids that weren't even born back in that time in the 80s, but for the kids of the 80s now in their 40s, they should know this because they've been through it. When you look at the cartoon stuff that was out on the that because cartoons were doing better at home on television with the likes of Voltron, He-Man, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Ninja Turtles, and even the Ghostbusters cartoon after the movie came out. And several other cartoons, the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon and whatever, Gem and the Holograms, Care Bears, and all that was out in the 80s for cartoon animation on television. But Disney, though, in the 80s, they were, they was like falling apart. Fox and the Hound was their last good, well-grossed box office ran Disney film they did. But then 1985 with the Black Cauldron, they fell apart, really fell apart. And as ambitious the Black Cauldron seemed, And then, Oliver and Company and, Great Mouse Detective. But again, Disney wasn't putting out much animated features that time. But instead, they focused more on live action film and television back then. And until they came up with Touchstone. And when they made Who Framed Roger Rabbit, it saved Disney from dying. And then when they made and got their act together again with The Little Mermaid, ending out the 80s, going into the 90s with the Disney Renaissance, the rest was history. And up until today with today's Disney movies, with the likes of films like Frozen or Zootopia or Turning Red, or Pixar films like, Onward in them now, and Soul and Toy Story 4, and even that new Buzz Lightyear spinoff that's coming out now. So, and again, as a kid, as a 90s kid and after being alive for 30 years, I've been through a lot with my generation with Disney, the 90s, 2000s, 2010s era of Disney. and even today's era of Disney films and stuff. So, but also in other further final thoughts, hadn't if Disney, you know, when they had Power Rangers, I kind of wish they could have took more care with this brand. But yet, look how far they've gotten with Star Wars and Marvel now. Marvel, with every movie they put out now, like with some Avengers movie or Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Guardians of the Galaxy, whatever, they make $1 billion at the box office, making Marvel more richer and powerful than ever because the power of the Mouse House, that being Disney. And look, even with Star Wars, yeah, sure, the sequel trilogy, you know, take your pick with that, and then the new stuff, and then the Disney Plus Star Wars stuff like The Mandalorian or whatever. I mean, look at how much money Star Wars is making for Disney now, and with Disney, and even with Disney buying out 20th Century Fox, and you know, but man, it's just I wish that back 2 decades ago when Disney had Power Rangers, I just kind of wish they could have done something great like with this franchise, like what they're doing right now with Marvel and Disney. But man, missed opportunity. While I may not liked how Disney handled Power Rangers, even back then and even today, they still turned in some good seasons. But the only stinker of a season they did was Operation Overdrive. So, but the rest was fine. But it's just Operation Overdrive is still the worst part of the Disney era of Power Rangers. And I guess to a degree Mystic Force, because, you know, if I want some Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter-esque stuff, I'll watch that, then watch Power Rangers Mystic Force. Well, even though Mystic Force is still part of the franchise. But, so those are my thoughts of the Disney era 20 years later. And, you know, I kind of am getting nostalgic about all the things that did happen and some good things that came out of the Disney era and some, you know, versus the bad stuff that came out of it. So I hope you guys enjoyed what I said over the audio recording for this podcast, and, you know, for my 8th season of the podcast within 10 years of the channel now. I'm just like, man. So let me know what you guys think about this, and what was your in the comments, what was your favorite season of the Disney era of Power Rangers? Is it Ninja Storm? Is it RPM? Is it Dino Thunder? Let me know in the comments. What's your favorite Disney era Power Ranger villain? What was your favorite Disney era Ranger? What's your favorite Disney era Ranger moment or a team up episode? Or, well, even though we didn't have much team ups, but what was your favorite though of that? What was your favorite Disney era Power Ranger theme song or so? Let me know in the comments, and I'm all for now. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time with a new episode of the Terra Venture podcast, and back to more production on my Power Rangers Lost Galaxy fan film stuff. Until then, thanks for listening, and the Terra Venture conference hall is now closed.